He never thought a normal day would turn into a nightmare that would change his life forever. The man everyone once respected now sat in the back of a police car, his hands locked in cold metal cuffs, staring at the ground. He had no idea how he ended up here, but deep down he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't justice. He had always lived quietly. He didn't talk much about his past. People who met him thought he was just another quiet, working man trying to make ends meet. He lived alone in a small rented house on the edge of town. Every morning he went to work early, came back late, cooked simple meals, and kept to himself. No one really knew where he came from, and he liked it that way. For him, peace was a gift. He had seen enough chaos in his life to know that silence was golden. He wasn't afraid of anyone, but he didn't want to fight anymore. He had fought enough battles already. The kind of battles that don't leave medals, only memories that keep you awake at night. That day started like any other. The sun rose over the neighborhood. Kids ran to the school bus, and he stepped outside with a cup of black coffee in his hand. The world felt quiet. He liked mornings because they reminded him of calm before everything got loud again. But that peace didn't last long. By noon, his life turned upside down. He was on his way home from the grocery store when 2 police cars surrounded his old pickup truck. Officers jumped out shouting orders. Confused, he raised his hands thinking it was a mistake. But before he could speak, one of them pushed him against the hood, cuffed his wrists, and read him his rights. People passing by stopped to watch. He felt humiliation burning in his chest. At the station, they told him he was under arrest for armed robbery. He was stunned. He didn't even own a gun. He tried to explain, tried to tell them there must be some mistake, but no one listened. The officers had their story ready. The evidence lined up: a blurry security camera photo, a stolen car found near his house, and a witness who claimed to have seen him at the crime scene. He kept asking for a lawyer, but no one seemed to care. They treated him like a criminal before he ever saw a courtroom. The world outside didn't care about the truth. It cared about headlines, and the headline that week was simple: local man arrested in violent robbery case. He was taken to a holding cell, surrounded by men who stared at him like he didn't belong there. He kept his eyes down, his mind calm. He remembered his training: breathe steady, stay quiet, watch everything. Days turned into weeks and then months. His public defender didn't have time for him. The system moved slow, almost like it wanted him to break. He kept telling the truth, but nobody cared about the truth of a quiet man with no connections. The prosecutor painted him as dangerous, clever, and violent, the kind of man society feared. When the trial finally came, he sat in court, wearing a cheap suit that didn't fit. The judge looked tired, the jury looked bored, and his lawyer looked like he'd rather be somewhere else. The evidence was weak, but it was enough to convince people who didn't know him. The witness who pointed at him didn't even make eye contact. The security footage was too blurry to tell anything, but the prosecutor said it was clear enough. The stolen car near his house turned out to have his fingerprints, but no one asked how they got there. He knew how. Someone had planted them, but proving it was impossible. The verdict came quickly: guilty. He didn't flinch when he heard it. He just sat still, hands folded, eyes staring at nothing. Inside, something quiet cracked. Years of calm, of discipline, of patience, all crushed in a single word. The sentence was 10 years in a maximum security prison. The words echoed in his head like a faraway explosion. He wanted to scream, to fight, to prove his innocence. But he didn't. He just took a deep breath. Years of training had taught him that losing control never solved anything. His family, what little of it he had left, didn't believe the news. His younger sister cried when she saw him in court. "Tell me this isn't true," she whispered. He looked her in the eye and said softly, "It isn't." She nodded, but her eyes were full of fear. When the guards took him away, he didn't look back. He had been taken away before, to foreign lands, to secret missions, but never like this. This was different. This wasn't a mission. This was a trap. The first night in prison felt unreal. The sound of steel doors closing echoed through the halls like thunder. The air smelled of sweat, bleach, and hopelessness. Men shouted in the distance, laughing, cursing, fighting. Every few seconds, a buzzer rang somewhere. The guard led him down a narrow hallway lined with cells. Faces stared from behind bars. Some curious, some angry, some broken. He kept walking, head straight, eyes calm. He was used to hostile eyes. His cell was small. Just a metal bed, a toilet, and a sink. The walls were covered with scratches and words left by men who had lost themselves there. When the door slammed shut, he sat on the bed and stared at the ceiling. He didn't pray for freedom. He prayed for strength. In the days that followed, he learned the rhythm of prison life. Wake up early. Line up for breakfast. Watch your back. Don't talk too much. Don't make friends too fast. Inside those walls, every word could be used against you. He noticed how the guards behaved. Who was strict, who was lazy, who looked away when things happened. He noticed which inmates moved in groups and which ones were left alone. He kept quiet, always watching, always calculating. To others, he looked like a harmless man just trying to survive. But inside, he was still a soldier. Every movement planned, every glance measured. He didn't want to fight, but he knew how. He just hoped he'd never have to again. He spent his time reading old books from the prison library and writing notes in a small notebook the guards allowed him to keep. No one knew what he wrote, but it kept his mind steady. Some of the younger inmates called him old-timer. They didn't know he was younger than most of them. War had just aged him faster. Weeks turned into months. He followed every rule, avoided every conflict, and stayed invisible. But prison has a way of noticing peace and destroying it. One afternoon in the cafeteria, he sat alone, eating quietly. A group of men from one of the dominant prison gangs walked past. They looked tough. Tattoos covering their arms, eyes filled with the kind of emptiness that comes from years of hate. One of them bumped into his shoulder on purpose, spilling food on his shirt. The room went silent for a second. Everyone waited to see what he would do. He simply took a napkin, wiped his shirt, and kept eating. That calmness confused them. In prison, most men react with violence or fear. He did neither. That made him interesting and dangerous. Later, one of the younger inmates warned him quietly, "They don't like when someone doesn't bow. Watch yourself." He nodded but didn't respond. He had seen men like them before. Loud, violent, but not disciplined. They thrived on fear. He didn't fear them. But he also didn't want trouble. That night, he sat on his bed, listening to the noise of the prison around him. Metal doors clanging, distant shouts, someone crying in the next block. He closed his eyes and remembered the sound of the desert wind, the echo of gunfire, the smell of dust and sweat. He remembered men he fought beside, men who didn't make it home. He remembered his commander once telling him, "The hardest battles are the ones you fight alone." Now, those words made sense. He had survived war, betrayal, and pain. He would survive this too, but deep inside something was changing. Each passing day tested his patience, his belief in justice, and his will to stay quiet. He watched the guards abuse power, watched weak inmates get beaten for no reason, watched lies control lives. It reminded him of corrupt regimes he had fought overseas. Only now, he was living inside one. He knew one thing. Truth doesn't stay buried forever. And though no one in that prison knew it yet, the quiet man they mocked was once one of the most skilled special operations soldiers in the country. A man who had led missions so classified that even the government erased his name from files. But here, he was just another inmate, or at least that's what they thought. When the lights went out that night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking of all the choices that had led him here. He didn't regret helping people in his past life. He didn't regret walking away from violence, but he regretted trusting a world that forgot him so easily. He knew how to wait. Waiting was a skill that had saved his life before. So he waited, for the truth, for justice, for something to change. He didn't know that fate had already started moving, and soon the world inside those walls would learn exactly who he really was. For now he was silent, but the storm inside him had just begun. Days in prison began to feel the same. The morning bell, the line for breakfast, the sound of boots echoing down the hall. Everything blended together. Time didn't move forward. It just circled around, trapping everyone in the same rhythm. He learned to live quietly. He didn't talk much, didn't join anyone's table, and didn't make enemies. He was the kind of man who seemed invisible, but people still noticed him. His calmness made others curious. In a place where anger ruled every corner, his silence stood out. Every morning he cleaned his cell before the guards came around. It wasn't for them, it was for himself. Order brought him peace. He folded his blanket neatly, wiped the small metal sink, and sat down to think. The cell was small, but in his mind he was somewhere else. somewhere open and quiet, maybe near the ocean or deep in the woods where the air felt clean. But peace was rare in a place like that. The gangs ran most of what happened inside. They controlled the food, the trades, and even the guards sometimes. If you wanted safety, you had to belong to someone. He didn't belong to anyone. He had noticed them watching him, the same group that had tested him in the cafeteria weeks before. They sat at the same corner table every day, whispering among themselves, glancing his way every now and then. He could feel their eyes, but he pretended not to. He had learned long ago that reacting too fast only made things worse. Silence was its own kind of weapon. Some of the younger inmates respected him for how calm he stayed. They came to him for advice, how to handle themselves, how to stay out of trouble. He never said much, just short sentences that made sense. Don't start what you can't finish. Keep your word. Watch more, talk less. He didn't try to be a teacher. He just spoke from experience. One afternoon, he was sitting in the small library, one of the only quiet places in the prison. He liked the smell of old paper and the sound of pages turning. It reminded him of his father's house when he was young, where reading was the only escape from hard times. A guard walked by and gave him a long look. This guard wasn't like the others. He was older, with tired eyes but a certain understanding in them. The man nodded slightly and he nodded back. It was the first moment of quiet respect he had felt since entering that place, but respect from one man couldn't protect him from the rest. Later that week, during lunch, one of the gang members approached his table. He was taller, younger, full of the kind of arrogance that grows from fear. He smiled, not the friendly kind, but the kind that hides a threat behind it. "You think you're better than us, old man?" the young man asked. He looked up, calm as ever. "No," he said softly, "just quieter." The room went quiet for a second, then a few men laughed under their breath. The young man's smile faded. "You'll talk different soon," he muttered before walking off. He didn't reply. He had seen men like that many times before, men who needed others to fear them to feel strong. He wasn't going to feed that fire. That night, while most of the inmates slept, he lay awake listening to the sounds of the prison. He could tell what was happening just by the echoes, the clank of doors, the low talk of guards, the heavy footsteps from the hallway. Years of training had made him sensitive to rhythm, sound, and movement. Even here, his instincts never left him. He closed his eyes and tried to focus on his breathing. Calm in, calm out. He remembered doing the same thing before missions, waiting for orders, waiting for silence to break. This was no battlefield, but it demanded the same patience. The next few days passed without much trouble, but tension grew. The gang members stared more openly now. They wanted to test him again. The younger inmates noticed it too. One of them, a quiet boy who worked in the kitchen, whispered to him one morning, "They're planning something. Be careful." He nodded in thanks, though he already knew. You could feel danger in the air before it arrived. It had a certain stillness to it, like the world was holding its breath. He didn't go looking for conflict, but he prepared himself just in case. He started doing small exercises in his cell, stretches, push-ups, breathing drills. Nothing that looked suspicious, but enough to keep his body ready. He didn't want to fight. He had promised himself long ago that his days of violence were over. But survival wasn't about wanting. It was about knowing when to act. Meanwhile, he watched how the prison worked. Who traded what for cigarettes? Who bribed which guard? Who owed who? It was like studying a small, dangerous city with its own rules. The guards barely interfered. Some of them were paid to look away when bad things happened. He realized that justice didn't live inside these walls. Only power did. One day, during yard time, he sat on the bench near the far fence, feeling the sunlight on his face. For a brief moment, he almost forgot where he was. But peace never lasted long. A shadow fell over him. When he opened his eyes, 3 of the gang members stood in front of him. They didn't speak at first. They just stared, trying to see if he'd flinch. He didn't. Finally, one of them said, "You keep acting like you're invisible. You're not. Around here, you pay or you bleed." He said nothing, just watched the man's face. "You don't talk, huh?" the man said again, stepping closer. "We'll make you talk soon." A guard shouted for everyone to line up. The men backed away, smirking. It wasn't over, only delayed. That evening, when he returned to his cell, the older guard from the library walked past and stopped. "You keep your head low, understand?" the guard said quietly. "Some people here don't like peace," he nodded. The guard studied him for a moment longer, then walked away. That night, the air in the prison felt heavier. It was the kind of stillness that came before a storm. He sat on the edge of his bed, eyes on the door, ears alert. He could tell by the footsteps when the guard switched shifts, when the noise in the hall faded, when whispers started to echo. Then, silence. He didn't move. The sound came again. Soft, slow, from the corner of the block. Someone was moving, trying to be quiet. He knew the rhythm of stealth, and this was it. He waited, calm but alert. He wasn't afraid. Not because he thought he couldn't be hurt, but because fear never helped. It made people blind. He needed to see clearly. After a few minutes, the noise faded again. Maybe they changed their minds, or maybe it wasn't meant to happen that night. He stayed awake until dawn, watching the first light hit the cell bars. The next morning, one of the inmates who often spoke to him said softly, "They're scared of you now. You didn't even have to do anything." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes silence says enough." The young man laughed. "Yeah, but they'll try again. That's what they do." He nodded, knowing it was true. In a place like this, people didn't forgive peace, and they tested it until it broke. As the days went by, he noticed small changes. Fewer inmates crossed him. Some even started greeting him quietly in the hallway. The guard who once ignored him now gave a small nod whenever they passed. It wasn't friendship, but it was respect. Still, danger lingered like a shadow. He could feel it. One evening, during mealtime, he saw the same young man who had threatened him earlier whispering to a guard. It wasn't unusual. Guards and gangs often traded favors. But something about the look they shared didn't feel right. That night, his cell door didn't close properly. He knew that wasn't an accident. He sat on the bed, eyes calm but sharp. The footsteps came again, closer this time. He didn't move. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the end of the hallway, the older guard's voice. "Lock down now!" The alarm buzzed, and the door slammed shut automatically. The noise scattered whoever had been moving in the dark. He exhaled quietly. He knew that man had just saved him from something ugly. The next morning, the guard passed his cell, pretending nothing happened. Their eyes met for a brief second. He nodded slightly in thanks. The guard gave a small, almost invisible nod back. Days turned into weeks again. The tension didn't go away, but it didn't explode either. It just sat there, heavy in the air, waiting. He went back to his quiet routine, cleaning, reading, thinking. He focused on staying mentally strong. He thought about his past life, the missions, the brothers he lost, the oaths he made. He remembered a promise he made to himself. Never let the world turn him bitter. Sometimes during the night, he'd hear other men crying softly in their cells. He didn't judge them. Everyone had their breaking point. But he also knew that strength didn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it just meant standing through the storm. The younger inmates kept coming to him for advice. One asked how he stayed so calm. He answered, "You don't fight the storm. You learn to stand in it." They didn't fully understand, but they felt the truth in his words. He didn't know it yet, but slowly, quietly, he was becoming something more than an inmate to them. He was becoming a symbol, a reminder that even in a broken place, dignity could survive. But the gang hadn't forgotten him. Their pride was hurt, and pride doesn't heal easily. Something was coming. He could feel it, like a cold wind that creeps in before winter. But he didn't run from it. He had faced worse things in life. He wasn't a victim, just a man caught in a fight he never asked for. He watched, waited, and breathed. Every sound, every movement, every whisper in the corridor, he took it all in, preparing without showing it. The storm was close now, but what no one in that prison knew yet was that when it came, it wouldn't be him who broke. It would be everyone who underestimated the quiet man behind those bars. The tension inside the prison had grown thicker than ever. Everyone could feel it, even the guards. Something was about to happen, but no one knew when. The quiet man in cell 27 knew too. He could sense it like a shift in the air before a storm. He had seen it too many times before, that stillness that comes before chaos. Every sound in the prison had meaning now. The slow footsteps in the hallway, the low laughter from a corner, the clank of metal trays in the cafeteria. All of it carried hidden messages. He noticed everything, even when he didn't look. That was how he survived. He still kept to himself, eating quietly, working in the laundry, following the rules, but eyes followed him everywhere. The gang that had been watching him had not forgotten their humiliation. They had tried to scare him, corner him, make him react, but he never gave them the satisfaction. That made them angry. The younger inmates kept their distance now. They respected him, but they were afraid of being caught in the crossfire. Everyone in that prison knew that when a man refused to bow, it was only a matter of time before someone tried to break him. One morning, the prison felt unusually quiet. He woke up early before the bell and sat on his bed. The light from the narrow window barely reached his face. He had a feeling something was wrong, though he couldn't say what. Years of training had taught him to listen to his instincts, and right now they were whispering danger. When breakfast came, he noticed a few faces missing from the cafeteria line. The same ones who usually followed the gang leader. That confirmed what he already suspected. They were planning something. He stayed calm. He always stayed calm. He walked through the day as usual, washing laundry, folding uniforms, avoiding unnecessary talk. To anyone watching, he looked like a man simply surviving another day in prison, but his mind was sharp, focused. He mapped every hallway, every exit, every camera blind spot. He didn't want trouble, but if trouble came, he needed to be ready, not just for himself, but for anyone who might get hurt because of it. By afternoon, the mood in the prison yard had shifted. The sun was high, but the energy was dark. The gang members stood together near the basketball court, whispering. He sat alone near the fence, pretending not to notice. A few of the other inmates kept their distance. Everyone felt something was coming. The guards, distracted and tired, didn't see it. Some probably didn't care. When the bell rang for everyone to return to their cells, he stood up and walked back slowly, eyes scanning without turning his head. His heart was steady. He had faced worse, but still, he wished he didn't have to face this at all. That evening, he worked late in the laundry room. The air was heavy with steam and the smell of detergent. The sound of machines filled the room. It was one of the few places in the prison where the cameras didn't cover every corner. He noticed one of the machines had stopped running. The sound of silence from that corner didn't fit with the rest. Then he saw shadows move behind the racks. He knew. He didn't panic. He just stood there for a second, breathing. He remembered a saying from long ago, "When you can't run, stand like the earth." He turned slowly, pretending to fix the laundry bin, but his eyes were alert. From the corner of his vision, he saw 3 figures moving closer. They were trying to be quiet, but to him their movement was loud as thunder. They surrounded him, blocking the exits. One of them said something he couldn't fully hear. It didn't matter. Words weren't the point anymore. He didn't want to fight. He didn't raise his hands or posture for defense. He spoke in a calm voice, almost too soft to hear. "You don't have to do this." For a second, they hesitated. They didn't expect that. His voice wasn't angry or scared. It was steady, like someone who had already seen too much to fear anything anymore. Then everything happened fast. He didn't throw punches. He didn't yell. He just moved. The way someone moves who's done this before, who knows exactly where to be and where not to be. It wasn't violence. It was precision. He avoided the first attack easily, sidestepped another, and within moments the noise of the fight turned into silence. No one was seriously hurt, but everyone in that room understood something now. This quiet man wasn't what he seemed. He was controlled, disciplined, and trained far beyond anyone there. He stood still afterward, breathing calmly, waiting for the guards to arrive. When they did, they were shocked by what they saw. The gang members were on the ground, shaken but not harmed, and he was standing quietly in the middle of the room, hands behind his back. The guards yelled orders, dragged him out, and locked him in solitary. He didn't resist. He didn't argue. He just walked. Inside the small solitary cell, there was nothing but walls and silence. For most men, it was a punishment. For him, it was peace. He sat on the floor, breathing slow and deep. He thought about the years he spent training, the long nights, the missions, the orders he followed without question. He remembered the times he came home, invisible to the world that had no idea what he had done for them. He had lived in shadows for most of his life, and now, he was back in one. 2 days passed before the door opened. The older guard, the one who had shown him respect before, stepped inside. "What really happened in there?" he asked quietly. He looked up. "Nothing I wanted to happen," he said simply. The guard studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You didn't start it?" No, he replied. But I finished it before someone else got hurt. The guard sighed. You know, you're not like the others in here. The way you move, the way you think, it's not normal. He didn't respond. The guard continued. I looked into your file. Most of it's blacked out. You know what that means? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The guard already knew. Who are you really? The guard asked finally. He looked at him with calm, steady eyes. Just someone trying to stay quiet. The guard gave a small nod. Well, your quiet's got everyone talking. The warden wants to see you. Later that day, he was taken to the warden's office when a small, cold room filled with files and old furniture. The warden was a strict man with sharp eyes. He stared at the prisoner for a long time before speaking. You've caused quite a stir, the warden said. You've got half the prison scared and the other half curious. I didn't come here to cause anything, he said softly. The warden leaned back in his chair. You know what's strange? Your record before prison is almost empty. No job listed. No family contacts. But the government database shows something else. Your name's linked to sealed military files. He said nothing. The warden continued. You're not some random guy, are you? He stayed silent. His face gave nothing away. The warden exhaled slowly. Whatever you did out there, you're not that man in here. But if I were you, I'd keep your head low. These people don't like mysteries. He nodded slightly. That's what I've been trying to do. They sent him back to his cell, but things were different now. Everyone looked at him differently, not with pity or mockery, but with quiet respect. Even the gang members avoided his path. The younger inmates whispered stories about him. Some said he was an old soldier. Others said he used to work for the government. No one knew the truth, but the rumors spread fast. He didn't care about the stories. He just wanted peace. But peace was something the world never seemed to let him have. A few nights later, the older guard visited him again. He leaned against the bars and spoke softly. They were going to hurt you that night. But what you did, it saved more than just yourself. You probably stopped something bigger from happening. He looked up. I didn't do it for them. I just didn't want another man dying over pride. The guard nodded. Still, people are talking about what happened. The administration's nervous. Some of the other guards are saying you might be dangerous. He smiled faintly. Only to the people who pushed too hard. The guard gave a half smile in return. I figured as much. Then he said quietly, I used to be in the service too. I recognize discipline when I see it. You're not a criminal. Someone put you here, didn't they? He didn't respond, but the silence said enough. The guard lowered his voice. I'm going to make a few calls. You deserve better than this. The man watched him walk away. For the first time since coming to prison, he felt something. A small spark of hope. Days passed. He went back to his routine. The noise in the prison had changed. Where there used to be laughter and shouting, now there was quiet. The guards treated him differently, not kindly, but carefully. The inmates gave him space. The gang that once hunted him was nowhere to be seen. He didn't feel proud. He didn't feel powerful. He felt tired. All he had ever wanted was peace, but somehow, peace always came after chaos. One afternoon, while working in the yard, he saw the older guard speaking with a man in a suit near the gate. They both glanced his way. The man in the suit had the look of authority. Not a local cop, but someone higher. He knew the look too well. Later that evening, he was called to the warden's office again. The man in the suit was there, waiting. He had a folder in his hand and a calm, unreadable face. You've had quite a career, the man said quietly, though most of it doesn't officially exist. He stayed silent. The man continued. You were one of the best. But then you disappeared. No records. No contact, just gone. Now here you are in a prison you don't belong in. He looked the man in the eye. Sometimes disappearing is the only way to stay alive. The man nodded slowly. Maybe, but you've stayed invisible long enough. The truth always finds its way back. The conversation ended there. No threats, no promises, just understanding. When he returned to his cell that night, the air felt lighter somehow. He didn't know what the future held, but something had changed. Someone out there knew who he really was. Maybe, just maybe, the truth would finally come out. He sat on his bed, staring at the faint moonlight through the bars. The prison was quiet now. The same silence that once felt like a cage now felt like peace. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, almost over. He didn't know if he was right. But for the first time, he allowed himself to believe it might be. The days that followed were strangely quiet. The tension that had filled the prison halls seemed to fade, replaced by whispers. Everyone had a story to tell about the quiet man from cell 27. Some said he was an undercover officer. Others believed he was part of something secret, something powerful. He ignored all of it. He had no interest in stories or rumors. He had spent years living in silence, and now, silence was his only peace. Still, something had changed. The guards no longer barked orders at him. The other inmates moved aside when he walked by. Even the gang that once tried to break him kept their distance. Power in prison didn't always come from violence. Sometimes it came from mystery, and now he was the biggest mystery of all. But he didn't feel powerful. He felt tired. All his life he had fought battles no one saw, carried burdens no one knew about. The hardest part wasn't the pain, it was the loneliness. Being strong meant standing alone, and he had been alone for too long. One morning, as he was cleaning his small cell, the door opened. The older guard stood there again. His face was serious but not cold. "You've got visitors," he said quietly. He frowned slightly. "Visitors?" The guard nodded. "Two men from the outside. Government people." He hesitated. Visitors from the government never came without reason. He followed the guard through the hallway. The other inmates watched him go, whispering as he passed. In the small interview room, two men waited. Both wore suits and carried files. They looked professional, calm but cautious. The older one spoke first. "You know why we're here," he said. He didn't reply. The man continued. "You served this country for years. You were part of missions most people don't even know existed. But then you disappeared. No trace, no contact, no explanation. And now we find you here in this place." He kept his voice steady. "I didn't disappear. I was forgotten." The younger agent looked uncomfortable. "There are people who still remember you. You did things no one else could have done. We owe you more than you know." He smiled faintly. "Then why am I here?" The older man sighed. "That's what we're trying to figure out. The reports say you were arrested for armed robbery, but we've looked into it. The evidence doesn't add up. The witness statements don't match. Someone set you up," he said nothing. He had known it from the beginning, but hearing it from someone else felt both strange and heavy. The man continued. "We're reopening your case. It'll take time, but we're not letting this go. You shouldn't be here." He looked down at his hands. They were scarred, old, marked by years of work and war. "I stopped expecting fairness a long time ago," he said softly. The agent replied, "Sometimes it just takes longer to find the truth." After they left, he sat in silence for a long time. Hope was dangerous in a place like this. It could lift you up, then drop you harder than before. But still a small spark lit inside him. Maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't over yet. The next few weeks moved slowly. The outside world began to whisper his name again. The news picked up pieces of the story. A decorated soldier wrongfully imprisoned. People wanted answers. The system that had ignored him for so long was now being forced to look. Inside the prison, the whispers grew louder. Even the gang that once hated him now looked at him with a strange kind of respect. They didn't understand him, but they knew he was different. He wasn't just surviving. He was teaching everyone around him something they couldn't name. He started helping a few of the younger inmates, not by talking much, but by guiding them quietly. He showed them how to stay calm, how to think before reacting, how to hold on to themselves when everything felt lost. "You don't fight every battle," he told one of them. "Some you just outlast." The young man nodded, repeating the words to himself. It was a simple lesson, but it stuck. One day the older guard came to his cell again. He looked tired but relieved. "You've got another visitor," he said. This time it was a woman, a lawyer. She had kind eyes and a stack of papers in her hands. She spoke softly, but there was confidence in her voice. "I've been assigned to your case," she said. "We have reason to believe the officers who arrested you were involved in a series of false convictions. They targeted people who couldn't fight back." He listened quietly. "I'm going to need your help," she continued. "You were calm during the whole process. You didn't resist, didn't argue. That tells me something. You knew fighting them then wouldn't help." He nodded slightly. "I've learned patience the hard way." She smiled a little. "Then you'll need it again. This won't be quick, but I believe in your innocence." After she left, he sat for a long time thinking about her words. Belief was a powerful thing. It had been years since anyone believed in him. Days passed, then weeks. The investigation moved slowly, but it was moving. The lawyer came often, bringing updates. Each time she looked a little more confident. "We're getting somewhere," she said one afternoon. "The key witness, the one who said he saw you at the scene, has changed his story. He says he was pressured by the police. He stayed quiet, but inside his heart beat a little faster. Another week went by and new evidence surfaced. Fingerprints, documents, messages, all showing that someone had planted false proof." The lawyer smiled when she told him. "We're close," she said. "Very close." Meanwhile, the prison's atmosphere shifted. Guards treated him with care now, almost respect. Some even apologized in their own quiet way. Not with words, but with small gestures like letting him stay longer in the yard or giving him extra books. He didn't need apologies. What he wanted was simple: freedom. Not just from the walls, but from the weight of being misunderstood. At night, he lay on his bed staring at the ceiling. He thought about his past life, the missions, the faces of people he once protected, the promises he made to himself. He had lived his whole life serving others, and in return he had been forgotten. But maybe this was how it was meant to be tested one last time before peace. Then one morning the guard came running down the hallway with a small smile. "You're wanted in the office," he said. He stood up slowly, not expecting much. He had learned not to hope too early. But when he entered the warden's office, he saw the lawyer waiting with a bright expression. She held a paper in her hand. "It's over," she said softly. "You're free." For a moment he didn't understand. Her words sounded distant, unreal. "Free?" he repeated quietly. She nodded. "The case was thrown out. You've been cleared. The people who set you up are being investigated. You'll be leaving today." He didn't move. He just stood there, breathing slowly. The air in the room felt lighter, warmer. After so many months of stillness, he finally felt something again: relief. The warden looked at him with a mix of respect and guilt. "You were never supposed to be here," he said. He nodded. "Most people aren't." They processed his release that afternoon. The older guard who had watched over him was there. He shook his hand firmly. "You don't owe anyone an explanation," the guard said. "But you've changed this place. Don't forget that," he smiled faintly. "I won't." When he stepped outside the prison gates, the sunlight hit his face. It felt strange, warm, real, alive. He stood there for a long moment, taking in the open air. The sound of birds, the smell of grass, things he hadn't noticed in years. The lawyer waited near the car. "Where will you go now?" she asked. He looked at the horizon. "Somewhere quiet," she smiled. "You've earned it." He got into the car and they drove away. The prison disappeared behind them, a memory fading into the distance. He didn't look back. There was no reason to. Days later, he found himself standing near a small lake in the countryside. The air was still and the water reflected the sky like glass. He sat on a rock near the edge, watching the ripples move slowly outward. He thought about everything that had happened: the lies, the pain, the silence, and finally, the truth. He didn't feel anger anymore, only peace. He knew he couldn't change the past, but maybe he could use it to help others. People like him, men and women who had been forgotten by the system, judged by mistakes they didn't make. He began working quietly with a small group that helped veterans who struggled to return to normal life. He didn't talk about his past. He didn't tell his story. He just listened, guided, and helped. Sometimes at night, when the world was quiet, he would sit by the lake and close his eyes. He still heard echoes from his past. Orders shouted in the dark, the sound of helicopters, the weight of silence after missions. But those memories didn't haunt him anymore. They reminded him who he was and how far he had come. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a victim. He was just a man who had lived through too much and still managed to stay kind. People who met him now saw a calm, gentle soul. They had no idea of the storms he had survived. He never told them. He didn't need to. His quiet strength spoke louder than words ever could. And though he had once been broken by injustice, he now stood as proof that even in the darkest places, truth can still find its way through. He looked out at the water one last time and smiled softly. For the first time in years, he felt free, not just from prison walls, but from the weight of silence itself. He had spent so long hiding from the world, But now he was finally home, not in a place, but in peace. The small house near the edge of the lake had become a place of quiet peace. It was simple, nothing fancy. A wooden porch, an old rocking chair, and the soft sound of water nearby. After years of noise, fear, and uncertainty, silence had become his closest companion. Every morning he woke up early, made a small cup of coffee, and stepped outside to watch the sunrise. The world felt different now. The colors looked brighter, the air smelled fresher, and even the smallest sounds, birds, wind, waves, carried meaning. Freedom was something most people took for granted, but for him, it was sacred. He didn't rush through his days anymore. Every moment felt like a gift, and he treated it that way. At first he thought he wanted to disappear completely, to live quietly, away from people and memories. But life had other plans. One afternoon, while he was sitting by the water, an old friend from the service found him. They hadn't spoken in years, not since the days when missions were still part of his world. The friend had seen his story on the news and tracked him down. They sat together for a long time talking about the past, the mistakes, and the strange way life could break you just to rebuild you again. "You could help a lot of people," his friend said softly. "There are others like you, veterans who were lost in the system, forgotten. You know what that feels like." He looked down at the water and nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "I know." That conversation stayed with him for days. He couldn't ignore it. He had spent so many years surviving. But maybe now was the time to start giving back. So he began visiting a local community center that helped former soldiers adjust to life after service. He didn't talk about his past much. People already knew bits and pieces from the news. But what they didn't know was how much he cared. He listened to their stories, men and women struggling to find work, battling loneliness, dealing with memories that never seemed to fade. He offered advice when needed, silence when it was better, and patience always. People respected him not because of what he had done in the past, but because of how he carried himself now, calm, steady, and humble. He never raised his voice, never spoke down to anyone. He treated everyone as an equal, no matter who they were or what they had done. The local media tried to interview him several times, but he always refused politely. "The story isn't about me," he would say. "It's about what's next." Word spread quietly about the man by the lake who helped veterans and former inmates start over. Soon, people from neighboring towns began visiting too, not for charity, but for guidance. They came with questions about life, forgiveness, and how to move on when the world had taken everything from them. He had no magic answers, only simple words born from experience. "You can't change what happened," he often said, "but you can decide what happens next." Those words touched people. They carried hope in them, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that stays inside your heart and grows slowly. Over time, he started a small foundation with the help of his lawyer and his old friend. It wasn't about money or fame. It was about rebuilding lives. They helped people find jobs, housing, and counseling. Some were veterans, others were victims of wrongful convictions like him. He didn't want recognition, but soon his name became known among those who worked for justice and reform. A few organizations even reached out asking him to speak at events to share his experience. At first, he said no. Talking about the past was painful. It brought back memories he had spent years trying to bury. But one day, after hearing about a young veteran who had taken his own life, he changed his mind. He stood on a small stage in front of a quiet crowd and told his story. Not the parts filled with danger or sadness, but the parts about strength, patience, and forgiveness. "I've seen what happens when people lose faith in themselves," he said slowly. "I've been there. But even in the darkest place, there's a way out. You just have to believe you're worth saving." The room was silent. Some people cried. Others just nodded quietly. He didn't need applause. He only wanted to remind them that pain didn't have to be permanent. After that, he continued to speak occasionally, not for fame, but to give others the same hope that had once saved him. As the years passed, the small house by the lake became a symbol of peace for many. People would visit just to sit with him, talk, or simply share silence. Some called him a hero, but he never accepted that title. "I'm just a man," he always said. "I've made mistakes too. The only difference is I learned how to keep walking." One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he sat on the porch watching the water reflect the fading light. The air was cool and the world was quiet. He thought about everything: the false accusations, the time in prison, the loneliness, and the strange way life had led him here. He didn't feel bitterness anymore. What once felt like punishment now felt like purpose. If he hadn't gone through all that pain, he might never have found this peace. The lawyer who had fought for his freedom visited sometimes. She always brought updates about the cases his foundation was helping. "You've changed more lives than you realize," she told him once. He smiled softly. "Maybe, but they changed mine too." Every now and then, letters arrived from people he'd helped, handwritten notes filled with gratitude and hope. He kept them in a small wooden box inside his house. When he felt tired or unsure, he'd open it and read a few lines. It reminded him why he did what he did. He never returned to the city where it all happened. Some things were better left behind, but he followed the news. The officers who framed him had been tried and convicted. The system that once ignored him had been forced to confront its flaws. Justice, though slow, had finally come, but he didn't celebrate. He didn't believe in revenge or satisfaction. He believed in moving forward. "What's done is done," he would say. "You can't heal by looking back." One night he sat by the lake under a clear sky. The stars were bright and the water shimmered with reflections. He thought about the men he had served with, those who never made it home. He whispered a quiet prayer for them, not with words but with gratitude. He realized something then. Peace wasn't about forgetting. It was about understanding. Understanding that every scar, every loss, every moment of pain was part of the journey that shaped who he was now. The next morning, he woke up early as usual. The air was cool and the mist hung low over the lake. He brewed his coffee, sat on the porch, and watched the sun rise. He thought about how strange life was. How a man once trapped behind bars could now sit freely, surrounded by nature and peace. He smiled to himself. "Maybe everything happens for a reason," he whispered. As the years rolled by, the small foundation grew. Younger people joined, bringing new energy and ideas. He stepped back from the front lines, letting them take the lead. He had done his part. Now it was time to rest. Still, every so often, someone would come to visit. A young man or woman looking for advice, a lost soul searching for direction. He always welcomed them warmly, offering tea and a seat by the porch. He never gave long speeches or complicated lessons. He just listened. And sometimes, at the right moment, he'd say a few words that stayed with them forever. "Life isn't about what happens to you," he would say gently. "It's about what you do next." Those simple words carried more power than anything else. They came from a man who had lived through the worst and still found peace in the simplest moments. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped low, a light breeze moved across the lake. He sat on the porch, eyes half closed, listening to the water. There was a faint smile on his face. He had no regrets, only gratitude. For the pain that had taught him strength, for the silence that had taught him patience, and for the freedom that had finally taught him peace. The world around him had changed, but he remained the same at heart, steady, calm, and humble. His story became more than just a tale of injustice. It became a message and a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's always a chance to rebuild, to forgive, and to find light again. Years later, people still spoke about him. The quiet man who once lost everything but found himself again. They told his story not as a tragedy, but as a lesson in resilience, hope, and quiet strength. And by the lake, where the sun touched the water and the wind whispered through the trees, peace remained, just as he had left it. The years had passed softly like waves brushing the edge of the shore. The house by the lake had aged a little. The paint had faded, the wood had grown rough, but it still stood strong, just like the man who lived inside it. His days were slow and peaceful now. He no longer kept track of time in the same way. He didn't rush through mornings or count the days on a calendar. Life had finally taught him that time didn't need to be chased. It needed to be lived. Every morning he still woke before sunrise. The quiet before dawn had become his favorite moment. He would sit by the window with a warm cup of coffee and watch the mist rise from the water. The world seemed gentle in those hours, untouched by noise or worry. Sometimes, he would smile at the thought that once, not too long ago, He had been locked behind concrete walls, counting seconds that never seemed to move. Now every second felt like a gift. People from the nearby town still came to visit him, some seeking advice, others just wanting to sit with someone who understood life's heavier truths. He never turned anyone away. He listened more than he spoke, because he had learned that sometimes silence healed better than words. There was a young man who came often. He had been discharged from the military and was struggling to adjust. He had the same haunted look that the older man once carried, the look of someone who had seen too much and didn't know how to return to the world again. The young man would sit quietly by the porch, saying little. After a while, the older man would start talking, not about war or pain, but about peace, about how to live one day at a time. One evening, the young man finally spoke. "How did you learn to forgive what happened to you?" The older man thought for a moment before answering. "I didn't forgive it right away," he said softly. "I was angry. I wanted someone to pay, but anger is heavy. It doesn't punish them, it punishes you. I had to put it down before it destroyed what was left of me." The young man nodded, staring out at the lake. "I don't know if I can do that." "You will," the older man said gently. "When you realize peace isn't about forgetting, it's about understanding." After that day, the young man kept coming back. Slowly, his shoulders relaxed, his eyes softened, and the darkness inside him began to fade. That was how it always happened. The people who came to see him weren't looking for miracles. They were looking for understanding, and somehow he always gave it to them. One summer afternoon, a small film crew arrived at his doorstep. They said they were making a documentary about veterans who had overcome injustice and rebuilt their lives. They had heard about his story from others and wanted to include him. At first, he refused. "I'm not looking for attention," he said. "I've told my story enough times." But the woman leading the crew spoke kindly. "It's not about fame," she said. "It's about helping others see that healing is possible. Some people still think they're alone in their pain." He looked at her for a long moment, then finally nodded. "All right," he said, "but I'll tell it my way." They set up their cameras near the lake. The breeze was soft and the sunlight danced across the water. He sat in his old chair, his face calm, his voice steady. He told them about his childhood, his service, the years he spent believing in something bigger than himself. He spoke about the mistakes, the betrayal, and the silence of the prison walls. But he also spoke about forgiveness, about finding peace after chaos, and about helping others find it too. When they asked him if he felt angry about what happened, he smiled slightly. "No," he said. "If none of that happened, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have met the people I've helped. I wouldn't have found peace. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best teacher." The documentary aired months later. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, and it was quiet, thoughtful, and honest. People across the country watched it. Letters and messages poured in from strangers who said his words gave them courage to start over. He read each one slowly, feeling both humbled and grateful. It amazed him how something so simple, the truth told plainly, and could reach so many hearts. As time went on, the foundation he had started continued to grow. It wasn't large, but it was steady. The younger people he had mentored now led the programs. They visited prisons, hospitals, and shelters, offering guidance and support to those who needed it most. He didn't take credit for any of it. They did it themselves, and he always said, "I just showed them it could be done." The local newspaper once called him the quiet hero. He laughed when he read that. "I'm no hero," he told his lawyer when she came by to visit. "I'm just someone who finally learned how to listen." She smiled. "That's exactly why people trust you." As the years passed, his health began to slow him down. He didn't mind. He had lived more than he ever expected to. He moved slower, rested more, and spent long hours sitting by the lake watching the seasons change. One autumn evening, a group of young people from the foundation came to visit. They brought him dinner, laughter, and stories from the latest projects. One of them said, "We're planning to name the new center after you." He shook his head gently. "You don't need to do that. We want to," another said. "Because you gave us all something we didn't have before, a belief." He smiled softly, his eyes warm. "Then make sure that place gives others the same thing. That's all the name it needs." Later that night, after everyone had left, he sat outside again. The air was crisp and the moonlight glowed softly across the water. He looked up at the stars and whispered a quiet thank you. not to anyone in particular, but to life itself. He thought about the path that had led him here. It hadn't been easy. It had broken him, remade him, and tested him in ways no one could imagine. But now, sitting in peace, he realized it had also freed him, not just from the prison he once lived in, but from the bitterness that had once lived inside him. He knew the end of his journey was near. He didn't fear it. He had made peace with life and peace with himself. The next morning he woke early, as he always did. The sunrise was more beautiful than usual. Streaks of gold and pink spread across the horizon. He sat quietly, breathing it all in. Later that day, one of the young volunteers stopped by with groceries. She found him on the porch, sitting in his chair, a gentle smile on his face, the coffee cup still beside him. He looked peaceful, like he had simply fallen asleep watching the morning light. Word spread quickly. People came from all over to pay their respects. Veterans, former inmates, families, and strangers all came to the small house by the lake to honor the man who had given them hope. The community decided to keep the house as it was. They turned it into a small retreat, a quiet place where people could come to reflect, to heal, or just to sit in peace. They called it the Haven by the Lake. Inside the house, on a small table near the window, they placed his wooden box of letters. Visitors often sat there and read the words written by those whose lives he had touched. His story continued to inspire many long after he was gone. It became a reminder that strength isn't about power, it's about grace. That even when life is unfair, kindness can still win. Years later, a young boy stood by the lake with his father. The father pointed toward the old house and said, "A man once lived there. He lost everything but never gave up. He helped others find peace even when the world wasn't kind to him." The boy looked at the house and asked, "Was he a soldier?" The father smiled softly. "He was more than that," he said. "He was a good man." The boy nodded, staring out at the water. "I want to be like him," and in that moment, the man's legacy lived on, not in monuments or fame, but in the quiet hearts of those who carried his lessons forward. The lake remained calm, the air soft, the trees whispering gently in the wind. Life moved on, but his presence lingered, in the peace he left behind, in the hope he gave, and in the countless lives he quietly changed. He had entered the world as a fighter, survived as a survivor, and left as a teacher of peace. His story reminded everyone who heard it that no matter how dark the path, light can always return, and somewhere, in the silence of the lake, his spirit rested and free at last.